Hey YouTube, what is up? I decided to revamp my Monarch deck because the ban lists have been pretty friendly to it, and we've gotten some spicy promos that I think personally helped this deck out quite a bit. So with that being said, let's bust into this deck profile. One thing I do want to say, actually the cards got out of order. I'm not playing Frostblast in the main deck, and I'm not playing Talakalel in the main deck, or Talakalel, I don't know, however you want to read this card. I'm not playing these two cards in the main deck, but I just wanted to discuss their versatility and playability in this deck and some interactions that I thought were pretty interesting, but I didn't think is the most optimal, but I wanted to discuss them anyway. So I'm playing a 40 card deck minus these two cards, just so you guys can see. So with that being said, I'm playing 3 Edea the Heavenly Squire. It's your best starter card. It's a roto target. It's a 1-for-1 target. It helps you recur your banished Monarch spells and traps. It summons out any vassal you want from deck. It summons your Eidos or Eidos, however you want to read that card, or your Mithra. It's really great. It basically just continues your plays. It's free advantage past turn 1, and there's no reason not to play 3 of it. I played 2 Aether, and I'm glad this card came back to 2. It's allowed me to make some changes to the deck that I think improve the deck's consistency and health and makes it slightly more viable than it was in the past. When we had 1 Aether, the deck was a lot more inconsistent, and you didn't really have many reactionary plays on your opponent's turn. But now that Aether's at 2 and Stormforth is at 3, you have a lot more responses on your opponent's turn, which is, I think, the main thing that this deck kind of needed. You also can now cut down your Karazes from 3 and 2 down to 1. I was always fiddling between the 2 and 3 ratio. You would essentially use Karaz as a pseudo draw engine to basically transfer the dead cards you had in your hand by setting them, and then popping them with Karaz to hopefully draw into more starter cards or cards you needed to continue your plays or lock your opponent out. And I didn't necessarily like that because it was kind of a luck of the draw thing. But now we can keep the Karaz in the deck, and we can tutor it out whenever we need with the Aethers. And 1 Karaz is perfectly fine for 2 Aethers. I never really felt like I needed another one. Sometimes you do draw the Karaz early on, but then you can just use it with the Return of the Monarchs to get dumb advantage and then go like +3 off of summoning it. So it's never really the worst thing in the world. Another thing I was able to cut was the Foolish Burial Goods engine, which I used to dump my Pantheism, my Prime, and when I played it, my Frostblast. It was a good engine, but it wasn't that great, and the later the game went, and if I drew into those cards, they were just really dead. I'd rather have drawn into an Aether late game rather than a Foolish Burial Goods, so that's why I took those cards out. But Aether is great because you can basically tribute summon on your opponent's turn. Stormforth allows you to tribute their own monsters, so that's really great. And then on top of that, you get to special summon a monster you want, and you can put a Prime in the graveyard to special summon another body as a blocker and defense. So it does a really large amount of things that this deck needed. And mainly that was turn 2 or on your opponent's turn responsive plays, and that's what I really liked. You could be reactive as opposed to being proactive, and the deck really struggled with being only proactive for a very long amount of time. Next up, I play 2 Eidos. I always draw this card for some reason, so I decided to cut it down to 2, and I haven't missed it since. For some reason, I'd always draw 2 or 3 of these. For some reason, it just loved to be in my hand. I have no understanding why, but I cut it down to 2. So it's been perfectly fine. A lot of people say you need to play like 3 of this and no Mithra, but I personally like 2 Eidos and 2 Mithra better. I've always been a fan of Mithra as a card. Eidos is great because it has the ability to, when it's summoned, basically give you an extra tribute summon, which is great, so you can normal this and then summon a Vanity's Fate on top of that. But its grave effect is really good because it allows you to recur and continue your plays. And a lot of people were saying, like, if you don't play 3 Eidos, you don't have long-term advantages. But essentially, if you had 3 Eidos, you'd only be able to banish them 3 times anyway. And the last one, you'd kind of be stuck because you wouldn't have another target in deck. But you get the same amount of summons by playing 2 Eidos, because the last one you just banish, summon the Edea from grave, and you can summon the Mithra, or you could just summon a Mithra from grave if you wanted to, and it does the same exact play. I also like Mithra a little bit more than Eidos because it doesn't activate on field to give you an extra tribute summon. Basically, if you tribute it, it activates in grave to give you an extra tribute summon, which is like Effect Veiler and Impermanence Proof. So I really, really like that. So 2 has never really been a problem for me. I still play 3 Erebus because non-targeting removal from hand, field, or grave, basically shuffling a card back to deck, is bonkers. And on top of that, you could send a card that basically searches any card in your deck, or summons a body, or does a whole bunch of other things in grave. And on top of this, Erebus allows you to, if it's in the graveyard itself, send a Monarch spell trap from your hand to the graveyard to add anything with Monarch stats from your graveyard back to your hand. So it gives you some recursion in turn 2 plays, turn 3 plays. You can recur your Aethers late game if you draw it early and you draw Erebus afterwards. I really like Erebus and what it does for this deck, and I'm glad it's the card that's at 3 and not at 2. If this card was at 2 and Aether was at 3, I think the deck would struggle a little bit more. I play the 1 Karaz like I mentioned before. I don't really think I have to like kind of talk about this anymore. And the Mithra I really like because the hardest matchup this deck has is Sky Strikers, and Mithra gives your opponent a token, which is a thing that kind of destroys Sky Strikers, so they have to open like the field spell and a Widow Anchor to out like a Vanity's Mithra lock, and if you have Domain on top of that, it's really, really impossible for them to get over because they have to open like Twin Twisters, Vanity, like Twin Twister, Widow Anchor, and then like the Field Spell or a Terraforming to get to the Field Spell, and it just makes it a whole lot harder for them. Mithra, at the cost of nothing to you, basically hinders them so much that this is a card I definitely have to play, and I'd like to play more of it, but I feel like 2 is the perfect ratio for it, because not every matchup is Sky Strikers, and not every matchup you contribute once. You sometimes need to tribute 2 or more monsters, and you don't draw the Domain, so the Mithra does hurt in those instances, and that's why I kind of play 2 instead of 3. Another card that I really like in this deck that some people might disagree with, to be honest, is Nibiru. Going second, this deck struggles a lot to break apart boards. It does have Erebus and it does have Stormforth, but that's not necessarily the easiest thing. You want to simplify the game state as much as possible in response to whatever your opponent's doing before you start breaking apart their stuff, because you don't want them to react to you picking apart their board. You kind of just want them to sit there and take it, and Nibiru is definitely the card to make them sit there. If they summon a couple more than 5 times, you can just plop this card down, give them a token, and then from there, if it's a combo deck and you hit them at the right time, they can't summon anymore, or they don't really have any more responses, so they just pass. And if you Nibiru them and they pass, they pretty much lose if you have an Aether in hand, because you literally just Stormforth, activate Domain, make Aether a level 6, tribute their token, and then you summon a Erebus from deck and you just punch them for like 8,600 damage straight to the face. You can get rid of that token so many different ways that it's never really a problem. You could spin it back, you could pop it, you could tribute it. There's so many different ways that this deck outs it. It's not even funny. I really like Nibiru as well because going second, it's good, but even if I've gone first and drawn this card, it's never really dead because sometimes they out your Domain lock very easily. This deck is a little bit more fragile than it was in the past, so if you end on something like an Erebus, let's say you end on Erebus, Domain, Return of the Monarchs, right? They out your Erebus, so your Domain lock is dead, and then they just proceed to wombo combo on you. You can Nibiru them, and then just summon an Aether after that point. Like, you have so many different ways to respond now with Nibiru, and giving them the token doesn't matter because you literally just Stormforth the token, and then you have Nibiru, Aether, and you summon like a Karaz. You could pop the token if you didn't have Stormforth. There's a lot of different ways that you can get rid of all their cards on their field and just give them one token, and then you can deal with that one token a lot quicker and easier than you would a whole field of monsters. So I really like the Nibiru, but if you are one of those people that doesn't like the Nibiru in the main deck, you can play something like Crackdown instead. If you're predominantly going first, Crackdown is definitely not bad. But I feel like playing 8 traps in this deck might be a little too much, but that's all personal preference really because this deck does brick a bit. But if you don't like Nibiru, you could switch it for the Crackdown. That's usually what I do if I'm going exclusively first. Next up, I play 3 Vanity's Fiend because locking your opponent out of special summoning is great. I don't play Majesty's Fiend anymore because I play the Monarch's Erupt, and if you could back up Vanity's Fiend with something like March of the Monarchs, many decks struggle to out that, and it's just basically a lock that can kill most combo decks, so I really like it. I remember even playing Vanity's Fiend in the Thunder Dragon deck for the mirror match because you literally just summon a Danger and then tribute it for the Vanity's Fiend, and then they wouldn't have an out for it unless they had Bigfoot in hand and they had like 6 or more cards in hand, so they'd have to discard it in end phase to pop the Vanity's Fiend. But then even if they did that, that's at their end phase, and you have a whole turn to just OTK because they didn't summon anything. So Vanity's Fiend is still a great card, and I think it's the bane of combo decks, even more so than maybe not even more so. Nibiru is pretty bonkers, but it's a very good card to have in tandem with Nibiru because you just basically shit on combo decks all day long. Domain of the Monarchs is great, and you still have to play 3 of it because your Domain lock is what you fall back into if you don't draw something like Vanity's Fiend. It is a little bit more fragile because it doesn't stop monsters from being special summoned, it just stops monsters from the extra deck from being special summoned, but still, more times than not, that's often enough to, not have to deal with too many things. But there are some instances where your opponent can special summon a Danger in attack mode, like a Bigfoot, and just 3k punch over your tribute summon monster, and then on turn 2 do their full combo, and then you're kind of screwed from there. But, Domain is what it is, and it helps more than it hinders, so I definitely play 3 of this card. I play 1 Foolish Burial just because you could send things like Idia to the graveyard to recur your banished cards. You could send your Erebus to recur any card in your graveyard by sending a Monarch's Blood Trap. You could send the Eidos if you have an Idia in graveyard but you don't have an Eidos because maybe they effect failure this card or something like that, and then you can tribute summon and get your engine started. Foolish Burial itself is very good for this deck, even though Foolish Burial Goods necessarily isn't anymore. I still play the 1 March of the Monarchs because having a non-targeted, a card that can't be destroyed by card effects or can't be targeted by card effects is very, very strong, and if it's Vanity's Fiend, it's even stronger. It's just a really good card, and it's a 1-of that doesn't really hurt this deck at all. 1 for 1 is great because it searches out your Idia, or your special summons your Idia, at the cost of sending a card to the graveyard from your hand, which isn't that bad. You can literally send this card to the graveyard and just ditch a Monarch's Blood Trap, and then add this back, and then you get your whole combo started from there. So 1 for 1, definitely a great starter card. Pantheism's the heart and soul of this deck, but it's at 1. If you don't know what this card does, you probably shouldn't be playing Monarchs. I really wish this card would come back, but it's never going to. I think it's way too unfair, especially with all these like draw OTK combo shits happening right now. This card could never come back to 3. Rhoda is great because it searches out your Edea. It's also a good Ash bait because sometimes I've drawn the Edea and the Rhoda at the same time, so I Rhoda first, and they might think I'm playing Sky Strikers or something like that, and they Ash it, and they panic Ash really quick, and then I could just summon the Edea, and then go, oops, you know, you should have asked that. Rhoda's a great card, and more often than not, I just use it to kind of get rid of hand traps before I go off. Return of the Monarchs is great because it does kind of stop hand traps, or cards like Solemn Strike. It stops your effects from getting negated pretty much because it is a mandatory chain link response. So if you tribute summon a monster like Karaz, or Erebus, or Aether, you can make those chain link 1, and this is a when, so it has to be chain link 2. So your opponent can't respond with cards like Strike or cards that respond by saying when, because those have to be the next chain link, and Return of the Monarchs chain blocks it. And then on top of that, it helps your recur advantage. If you tribute summon a Karaz, chain link 2 return, chain link 1 Karaz, search an Aether, and then pop the return to draw a card. It's never a bad thing. You just get so much advantage off this card. I only play 2 because I don't necessarily need to search it all that often. More often than not, I'm searching Domain, or I'm searching Stormforth, or if I really need to search it, I'll reveal 2 of these in a Tenacity by banishing a Pantheism. So 2 is perfectly fine. Tenacity is a great card because it literally just searches out any card in your deck. You definitely have to play 3 of it. Stormforth is great because you could just tribute summon any card your opponent has. It doesn't target, so obviously play 3 of these. I play 3 Erupt instead of playing the Majesty's Fiend because I like Erupt a lot more. Even if they out your Monarch, this card is still active until your end phase. So on their turn, if they get rid of your Monarch, like let's say you have an Erebus Domain Erupt, right? And they out your Erebus. Of course, they get special summon from the extra deck, but they still can't use monster effects on the field because this card says during your end phase, if you control no tribute summon monsters, send this card to the graveyard. So its effect is still active even if you don't have the tribute summon monster on the field until the end of your next turn, pretty much. So you have 2 turns where they can't really activate monsters effects on the field, and all they can do is maybe summon some big bodies and attack, but they can't like Boral Sword effect or anything like that. So I really, really like this card. Majesty's Fiend, if it's outed, it's done at that point, and then they could just pop off from there. And then at the end, I play 2 Prime Monarch because I feel like you have to play 2. Usually I have 1 in grave and I have 1 in hand by like turn 2 or 3, and you just get the Prime loop going on where you basically just shuffle a card back, banish a card, and you basically don't have to send 2 back to your deck with Prime because of the weird way these cards are worded. So you basically banish a card, shuffle a card back, draw a card, and you get to summon Prime at the same time. Really, really good loop. I wanted to discuss this card really quick because I think it has some synergy with Nibiru, but I just haven't figured out a way to really get that to work yet. Nibiru summons a big boy token, and this card says if this card is tributed, you can destroy any number of face-up monsters your opponent controls whose combined attack is less than or equal to the original attack of the monster tributed to tribute summon this card. So if you get like Stormforth a Nibiru token, this guy can nuke your opponent's board again. But I don't really see like the versatility of that happening all that often. It's a very, very specific opening you have to have because you can't tribute summon this on your opponent's turn more often than not. It'd be like a 4-card combo. You have to like Nibiru, Stormforth, Erupt, and have this card. So that's like 4 cards. It doesn't really work, but there might be a meme deck that I'll build eventually where I could just try and pull this combo off or like give them a big token and tribute it. But it has interesting stats. It's a Monarch stat card. It's a fairly new card, and I thought it had some synergy, but it's a level 5 too. So it's still kind of weird where it's not like in the realm of being usable with something like Celestial Observatory. But there might be a meme deck in the future for this, and I just thought it was interesting, and I wanted to mention the interaction that it had with Nibiru's token. It might not even work with Nibiru's token. I'm actually kind of confused about that as well because this says the original attack, and then this card says the token's attack becomes. So I'm still kind of hazy on that. But even then, you could tribute the Nibiru on your side of the field if you wanted to just do the same thing essentially and just like pop cards on the field equal to 3k, which is still a lot. And then Frostblast I would consider being my 41st card, but I'm still not sure if I really want to main deck this card because it's not great against combo matchups and doesn't really do anything. Drawing it really sucks, but it's great against the Sky Striker matchup. So if anything, I might take out the Twin Twister to put a Frostblast in because this card gets rid of 2 cards every turn and you can loop it with your Edea. And then it's basically like having a Twin Twister every turn that you don't have to really do anything for, and you can search at whim. So I really like it in the Sky Striker matchup, and I might move it out for a Twin Twister, but that's for the future to decide. I just wanted to mention it because it is still a very good card, and I have been able to... I remember using this card to like destroy Paleo for the longest time with Monarchs. But with that being said, let's bust onto the side deck because I feel like I've been rambling a bit there. I play 3 Spell Canceller because the hardest matchup for this deck is Sky Strikers. So if you can have like Spell Canceller in tandem with like Domain of the Monarchs, or you could have Spell Canceller in tandem with like March of the Monarchs, it's really hard for them to out. I don't really think they have an easy way to do it without like dumping cards to the grave and special summoning from the extra deck. So even if you don't get the Domain up, it's still really hard for them because they can't really activate any spells or do anything about it. So unless they draw the ray, they don't really have any response. You just poke for 18, and then if they do have an out for it, you could just tribute it with a Stormforth because you'll still have all your engines pretty much, but you don't really have to wait. Hold that. I'm an idiot. I just said you could activate Stormforth while his card's in the field. That is definitely wrong. That's my bad. I meant if they widow... They can't even widow it. If they impermanence this card, then you can Stormforth it. That's what I meant to say, and I realized I just completely skipped the impermanence. But if they have a way to negate this card, then you could just Stormforth it, get rid of it, do whatever you want. I really like it. Personally, I do not really pull it off all that often against Sky Strikers. I'd rather see like stuff like Twin Twister and stuff like that. But going first against Sky Strikers, this isn't the best card, but going second is kind of ideal because they set up their whole board and they have all the strategies, and you can like literally just Mithra summon Spell Canceller and they just go, oh shit, and then they lose. I really like it personally. Next up is 3 Dark Ruler No More. This card just makes it a lot easier. Like I said before, what you want to do with this deck is kind of simplify the game state and then basically pick apart their board from there. And this card just says no Monarch effect, no monster. I keep mixing up the word Monarch with monster, but basically it gets rid of all their monster effects, so you don't have to really do anything, and then you can just start slowly picking apart from there. They don't take any battle damage, but you can literally just attack over their stuff and just clear their board, and they don't really have a way to respond, especially if it's combo decks. This card kind of kills them. Next up is Twin Twisters for any back row intensive decks, stuff like Altergeist or Sky Strikers. This deck doesn't have the hardest time against Altergeist, to be honest, but you know, Twin Twisters does help against that matchup anyway. Crackdown in case I'm going first against like a combo deck or something like that, and I just want extra negates. Usually I want to draw into Crackdown or Monarch's Erupt in tandem with a Domain Lock, but that doesn't necessarily happen every time, and sometimes having the extra negate, the extra reactionary play, is what you need to actually survive until the next turn, where you could kind of pop off from there. And then same thing for the evenly matched as the Spell Canceller and the Dark Ruler No More and the Nibiru. It just simplifies the game state and allows you to kind of pick apart from there. So with that being said, guys, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully I didn't ramble too long. I feel like I got a little lost in the sauce there, but this is like the 10th time I've recorded this video because my systems have been not working the way they should. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and click subscribe because it's free, it's fun, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.